Want to say thank you for attending the Department of Political Sciences Alumni Chat titled It's Really Cool to Be a Lawyer. My name is Emma and I'm a peer advisor in the department. We are here today with 1985 University of Minnesota Political Science alumnus David Gross. David J.F. Gross is a partner and head of the Silicon Valley office of Faegre Drinker, a large professional firm with offices in the United States, England, and China. David is a national speaker on trial advocacy and design thinking, and the author of NIDA's The Power Trial Method and Faegre's Design Thinking and Visual Advocacy for Lawyers. As a member of Faegre's Legal Design Lab, David has held design training activities for Facebook, Lumentum, Seagate, US Bank, and several other leading companies and institutions. David serves on the board of Stanford Law School's Center on the Legal Profession and works closely with Stanford's Legal Design Lab on multiple events involving legal design. He's a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School. So today we have a variety of questions for David, and then at the end we will answer questions submitted via the Q&A. You can submit these questions in the Q&A throughout the entire presentation as well. So David, just to start out with, I think it would be great for our audience to hear a little bit about yourself, your path from undergraduate to law school, and your current role today.
Sure. I grew up in St. Paul. And when I say I grew up in St. Paul, I mean, I grew up in St. Paul. If you would have walked up to 13-year-old David and said, "Where's Edina?" I would have said, "What's Edina?" I did not cross the bridge into Minneapolis very often. And I certainly didn't go out to the suburbs. That was a time when the neighborhoods were very clustered and you basically stayed where you were. I believe I left the state of Minnesota 3 times in my first 20 years of my life. Once to cross the Canadian border to go to a lodge with my family. We had 7 kids, so 9 people. And then maybe once when I crossed the Wisconsin border to, go to Dairy Queen, I believe, because Dairy Queen had chocolate ice cream back then, where Minnesota did not. And then once I went all the way to San Diego with one of my brothers who was joining the Navy. That was the one time I actually left the state. So my first 20 years were very insulated. And then when I went to University of Minnesota, I did a lot of things, very involved, all kinds of activities. I was in the Greek system, but I was also doing legal services stuff. And I was on the campus committee on student behavior as kind of a judge. When students would get in trouble, I would be in part of the administrative board. And I also played intramural sports and, just did a bunch of different things. I was coming off of high school where I had kind of slipped and fell. So academically, so I did not perform well in high school. And I was just pushing the reset button, which was great because I had a chance to push the reset button. So I was kind of starting over in college and I got more serious about my studies. I made it through. And then my senior year, I got an internship in DC. And I remember flying to DC and I was terrified because I was thinking, I knew they used the same currency. I knew that you used US dollars. I knew that. But other than that, I was terrified. This kid from St. Paul, I remember going to Pizza Hut thinking, how much is a pizza? I thought it might be like $48 and I had like $4. And so it was terrifying. And then eventually I learned that DC and other states are like Minnesota. There's not that big a difference. And I flew home and said, I think I'd like to experience the world. And so I ended up, I stopped my entire grad school process and I took 1 year off and I decided to get any job I could. So I got a job selling fine jewelry at local malls for a year, which by the way was a great experience. So I would take the 21A bus to downtown Minneapolis from St. Paul. Then I would take a bus to one of the suburbs. I was in Brooklyn Center for about 6 months, and then I went to different suburbs. So I had about maybe 3 to 4 hours of bus rides every day and about 60 hours of on my feet selling jewelry. Loved it, but it was exhausting. And then at the end of that, I started law school. And what was funny is because of my upbringing and perspective, because I'd grown up in a family of 9 and never left St. Paul, and because I was at Minnesota, and by the way, I worked my way through school. So I worked at a food service from 7 a.m. to 10 every day. I worked. So I worked my way and had to balance everything with the job because I was paying my way through the University of Minnesota. So that all of that meant that when I did arrive at law school, I was coming from a perspective of someone who had worked very hard in a very insulated life and then worked very hard in a year off. So at that point, I thought law school was a joke. It's like, what you mean you just sit here and what, listen? And then what do? Study? So that's what you do. So that's, none of you have jobs. And I just remember thinking, if this is the rest of my life, I'm all in. And that's how it's been ever since, is I'm so appreciative and filled with gratitude that I'm able to do what I do. And I've that's been ever since, I would say, since the moment I first day of law school to today. It's been a joy.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Kind of going off of that, my next question would be, being a lawyer can look very different depending on your role and where you work. Could you expand on that a little bit more with your own experience and then those of the lawyers you know or who you work with?
Absolutely. And in fact, because I knew you'd be asking a question like that, I created just a few slides that I'm gonna walk you through, and then obviously I can answer any all the other questions you have. But if you can bear with me, and by the way, along the way, feel free to chime in. But I have a few slides that answers this kind of question of what do I do? What do lawyers do? Just kind of talk that through. And the first slide is, this is what lawyers do. So if a lawyer is a fruit or a vegetable, these are lawyers. And the point you need to understand is lawyers do everything. Lawyers do everything. Some lawyers walk into court like you see on TV. I'm a trial lawyer, so I stand up in front of a jury and I explain a case to a jury. So I'm a trial lawyer. A lot of us kind of know what that is. It's someone who goes into court and represents someone. But other lawyers help people buy homes. Other lawyers help people negotiate labor agreements. Other lawyers help people who are very poor and really struggling and need legal aid of some kind. Other lawyers work for the government. They work for a judge. They work for an agency. There are lawyers who work for companies. There are lawyers who work for universities, lawyers who work for schools. There are lawyers who aren't even lawyers. They get a law degree and then they go to the business world and they just do business stuff. They might be a salesperson. They might be a head of HR, and they're not using their legal training. They just are glad they have it. So I guess my first point that I want to just throw out at everyone is when you think of, well, what can you do with a law degree? The answer is anything and everything. And so what I love about that is it gets me, and I'll pause for one second, gets me my next slide, which is what a law degree does is open doors. It just creates all kinds of opportunities. Doors that would be shut without the law degree are opened. So if you wanted to do certain things, the law degree will allow you to do that. And so if I just stop right there, I'd say lawyers do almost everything and anything, and a law degree opens doors. And I've got more to say, but I wanted to pause there and ask, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, definitely. I think that perfectly answers the question. I think it's really good for our students who are here today to hear, for sure.
Yeah, it's not the case that if you become a lawyer, that means, for example, you write briefs, like you write legal documents and you go into, you can, that's what I do. I do stuff like that, but I'm just letting everyone know that's not the case. The other thing I think it's really important is lawyers speak for others. Essentially, you're given a microphone and someone comes to you and says, I'm hurting, I'm frustrated, or I'm confused, I'm lost, I'm trying to do something. They have some type of problem. It might be they've been wronged. It might be they simply want to buy a house. It might be they want to hire someone and they've never done that before. It might be they're struggling because a landlord is causing trouble and they don't know how to fight for themselves. It might be companies are worried about they're going to lose billions of dollars unless they do something relating to regulations or do something relating to the law. It might be there's a change in the law. And people come to you and they're called clients, right? They are clients. They come to you and what they're saying is, will you speak for me? And if you like that, if you like the idea of helping others and speaking for them, it is incredibly rewarding because you can see it. I will be talking to someone and I'll see other lawyers talking to people, and you can see they don't know how to talk for themselves because maybe it's too confusing. Maybe they don't understand what happened in the law. Maybe they're just shy, reserved. Maybe they're uneducated. Maybe they've been wronged a certain way and they can't think clearly. And so you have to help them think clearly. And so I think this opportunity to speak for others and help them, this is probably my number one joy as a lawyer, is seeing people say things like, I had so much stress and my stress has now gone away because you or your law firm are speaking for me. So I would say that's probably the most enjoyable aspect of what we do as lawyers. And I think pretty much every lawyer does that.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. And that's a great perspective to have on yeah.
And if I just, go, another one is lawyers use their brain. And what does that mean? It means two things. And most people don't realize this about lawyers, but it means two things. The first thing it means is what everyone thinks. Oh, I see. So do you have to be kind of smart to be a lawyer? The answer is kind of yes. If you don't like reading and you don't like things that are complicated and you don't like trying to understand things, the law is probably not going to be a great fit for you, because being a lawyer really means using your brain to try to understand things. You absolutely don't need to be a genius. You don't need to be a PhD. You don't need to understand science and all that stuff. But you do have to say, I am able to learn things and understand things, and I can use my brain in a way that does it. So if you're good in school, for example, you're going to be fine as a lawyer. If you're struggling in classes, or by the way, if you don't study, like if you're one of these people you're in school and you don't go to class and you don't study, it's going to be hard to go to law school. But if you go to class and you study, you're going to be fine, as a lawyer. So one way to use your brain is just thinking, understanding. But studies have shown, have you heard about brain imaging, where they take images of the brain? Yeah, you've seen that. Okay, so there's all these studies on brain imaging. If I am thinking about how I would solve a problem, there's a part of my brain that gets activated. So if they did a brain imaging and they said, well, what is David Gross thinking when he's trying to solve a problem? There's actually parts of my brain that'll light up. But here's the thing. There's an entirely different way to use your brain. And that's when not you're saying, how would I solve the problem? How do I see the issue? How do I understand this law? Or how do I understand this case? Or how I understand this contract? But you use a different part of your brain and you say, I wonder how this other person is viewing this. I wonder how this other person understands the contract. I wonder how this other person sees these facts. And we all know that's empathy, that's seeing the world through someone else's eyes. But lawyers need to use both parts of their brain. So for example, I can be in court and I completely understand my argument, but the judge has never heard it. So if I start telling the judge too many details in the first 30 seconds, the judge might say, Mr. Gross, you've lost me because you've just given me so many details in the first 30 seconds. And I could say, what do you mean I've lost you? I understand everything I'm saying. Everything I'm saying is perfectly clear. And I realize, oh, no, I'm not thinking with that other side of my brain. If I were the judge and I didn't understand anything and I hadn't heard anything, I'd be overwhelmed. So this ability to say, oh, I'm going to think about what other people see and feel, and then I'm going to communicate at that level. That's what lawyers do. And that's what's really exciting, that ability to switch gears from how I see something to how you see something. And that's a critical skill of lawyers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really great insight into kind of what it means to be a lawyer and kind of the inner workings of that profession as well.
Yeah, and it's really fun. I mean, the other thing I'll say that I love about being a lawyer, and I have here a map of the United States, and maybe everyone realizes this, but if you become a lawyer in any state in America, you can be a lawyer in any state in America. So if I go to law school in Kentucky and I want to be a lawyer in Minnesota, as long as it's an accredited law school, and there's hundreds of, there's a lot of accredited law schools, then I just need to simply pass the bar exam for that state or waive in if I've already passed an equivalent bar exam. So for example, for me, I originally was a Minnesota lawyer, so I passed the Minnesota bar exam. But then I went to work in Washington, D.C. for the United States Department of Justice. I was a lawyer for the United States government. I represented the CIA and the FBI and a bunch of other agencies. It was very exciting. Well, I was a member of the D.C. bar for that. And then I worked in Washington, D.C. for some law firms for a few years. Then I came back to Minnesota. And then 10 years ago, my wife and I, we have 3 daughters, and our youngest daughter was open to going to high school in Northern California, in Silicon Valley, and right below Stanford, or right below San Francisco, right near Stanford. And so I moved to California, and 10 years ago, I sat down for 2 months and took courses and watched videos, and then through sheer luck and the grace of God and the universe, passed the California bar at my age, which was whatever my age was 10 years ago. And that was really hard. I had not taken a test in 25 years. So I became a lawyer in California. But one thing that's fun is, and maybe everyone realizes this, but what's great about being a lawyer is, you know, you can say, I think I'll just go start a practice in Colorado. And you can go to Colorado, pass the bar, and start representing people. And I love that. I love the idea of the freedom that being a lawyer gives you. And I just don't think that's true for most jobs. Like, you can get a job, but it's, how are you going to get a job in another state? Well, you have to find someone willing to hire you. But if you're a lawyer, you know, you can go start practicing law in Arizona, and you can do it on your own if you wanted to. And so I really like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's super interesting. I didn't know any of that. So really cool. Facts. Then if you're okay, David, I'm going to move on to my next question.
Please.
Yeah, so next question, kind of relating to some of our undergrads that may be watching today. What experiences during your undergraduate career helped prepare you for law school and life as an attorney?
Well, I think you shouldn't worry at all about a particular course of study. So I think the course of study, to me, doesn't matter. I would think seriously about trying to take a year off or 2 years and do something before you hit law school, because the people in law school are older and more mature and very, very focused. So I just think having that 1 or 2 years of doing something, I don't think it matters what you do. It doesn't have to be law related, I think is good, unless you think you'll give up and you're worried you're going to give up. But I think for 90% of people, I think taking time off is something I've always urged people to do. But in college, I would say, number one, do you genuinely engage with whatever classes you're taking? We all know the difference between kind of doing the reading and getting your B, or sometimes if you're smart, your A. You know, you kind of did the reading, you kind of attended class, and you kind of, you're okay because you're kind of smart. The problem with that is then when you go to law school and there's other people who are just as smart as you, and some who are smarter, and they're studying, you're at a gigantic disadvantage because of what you did in college. So I think engaging in your classes, loving them, embracing them, actually doing the reading, even though it takes time, to me, that's, I guess, the most important thing. Are you really engaging in your classes where you care about the content? Even things like if you go to class and pay attention and sit up front and engage with the professor, you know, the students that everyone says, what are they doing? You want to be one of those. You want to be one of the students who's engaged. That doesn't mean you're talking all the time, but you're just focused. If you just did those 2 things, if you engaged in the contents, and then when you attended, you engaged in the class, that's huge. And then the other thing, I guess, is the reality of my world is, even though it helps to be smart and helps to be able to communicate, it is a relationship business. So it's about who do you have relationships with inside your law firm, or with clients, or with other lawyers. So if you're going through college and you're not practicing relationships, then you're falling a little bit behind. So I always urge people, try to go to the office hours and ask questions of your professors about the contents of the course, or even what they do. And what it really is practice for law school. And the other thing that helps is when you need that letter of recommendation, of course, if you actually attended the class and went to office hours, the letter of recommendation is better than David Gross, I believe, may have attended my class. He got, an A, so I'm sure he studied, and I recommend him for the University of Minnesota Law School, which is not ideal. So I guess that's the three things I would say. I don't think extracurriculars are critical other than try to do something. It's nice to do something leadershipy. It's nice to do something service oriented. It's nice to do something where you're helping others, but if you just back up, you got to look at what your GPA is. You have to prepare for the LSAT. Obviously, the LSAT's a really big lift. It's a heavy lift, so you got to study for it. I think if you take a year off, you could take your LSAT maybe your senior year or right after your senior year when you have a little bit more time. That's, you could take the summer after college and study for the LSAT because you have a year off or two off. But anyway, stepping back, I would just say engaging in the subject matter is critical, engaging in the actual class, and then working on relationships with people, especially professors and administrators. That if you can do that and you can kick into that gear, even if you fall, you'll get better. So for example, let's say it doesn't work out, so what? There's other professors, it doesn't work out with this, but so what? Just try stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really good advice for students to hear. And then kind of piggybacking off of that, my next question would be, many of the students here today are in the law school exploration process. Could you talk about your decision to attend law school versus any other options you explored, or how you choose a law school? Anything about the exploration process for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to stop sharing. I can always come back to that if we need to. But yeah, so for me, I wanted to be a lawyer since I was a kid. Always wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't really know anything about what a lawyer did, other than my dad was a judge in St. Paul, and I would go and watch my dad in court, and it just looked cool. Oh, I like this idea of court. But I had no idea what a law firm was. I did not know what a legal brief was. I didn't know lawyers wrote legal briefs, in cases. I didn't know that lawyers took depositions in cases. I didn't know lawyers were business lawyers. So just to be clear, I didn't know anything about lawyers other than this court thing looks kind of fun. I think I'd like to do that. And so what was funny is I kept telling people I want to be a lawyer my whole life. I learned what a lawyer does after the first year of law school, when I started going to a law firm. Then I started going, oh, wow, I did not realize this is what lawyers did. So I learned about what lawyers do after I had already completely committed myself. But I was always going to be a lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer, so I didn't look for anything else. I know there are some people on the fence. I think if you're on the fence, the only concern I have is sometimes you're borrowing a lot of money to go to law school. So I would make sure you're all in before you commit yourself to paying for a law school education. I would not just kind of go to law school. I would be all in. And if I wouldn't go to law school for the wrong reasons. So if, for example, I didn't know what else to do, I wouldn't get a law degree. There's a lot of people who will say, I wasn't sure what to do, so I got a law degree, and I really regretted it because it was a waste of 3 years and I now owe a bunch of money and I'm not sure I like this. So I would say you want to be leaning towards wanting to be a lawyer. And then if you decide you want to go all in, like, I can't wait for law school, I'm so excited, can't wait to take the LSAT, I love it, not, wow, I hate this LSAT and I can't stand these applications and, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I mean, that's just not the right attitude. So I try to change your attitude towards, I get to go to law school, not, I guess I'm going to go. So that's where I would be on people who are on the fence.
Yeah, definitely. Could you speak a little bit about how you decided on which law school to attend?
Yeah, I was of the view, I want to go to a really good law school and I'm going to practice in Minnesota. So I did not think I was going to be a lawyer outside of Minnesota. So I was very excited when I got into the University of Minnesota Law School. Then my senior year, when I did that DC internship and I came back and said, because I my mind opened up so much going into Washington, D.C. I think I want to go to law school somewhere else, merely because I'd never left the state of Minnesota. It's just, so that's when I opened my eyes up to other law schools. I got into really great law schools, so I was really blessed with a lot of opportunities. And so I ended up going to Harvard, which was great law school, but it was also kind of a jarring experience because when I went to Harvard, because I knew nothing about anything, I was a state school kid. So I was someone from the University of Minnesota, which was considered a state school. And I had this completely warped view of the world. So I thought kids who had gone to other colleges had some advantage over me. I just thought, they knew it. And I always remember there's some of you, many of you may know this, but there are these incredibly impressive liberal arts colleges. Amherst is one. It's the #1 rated small liberal arts college in the world or country. There's Williams. There's a bunch of other liberal arts colleges. And I just remember the first couple of weeks I was meeting kids, and they would tell me that they went to these incredibly prestigious schools that I never would be able to get into. You had to go to boarding schools, and it's just really hard to get in. And when they would tell me, I would say, wow, so what is Amherst? What is that? So that's a 4-year college? Oh, good for you. And I had no idea that there was this world. And so I was not only just ignorant, didn't understand anything, but also I just thought there's a bunch of people around here who must know the secrets. So it was a little jarring for me, I would say, to go to Harvard just for that reason. But I think had I gone to any of the top 20 or 30 law schools, I would have had an almost identical experience, which is amazing professors, amazing students, amazing opportunities. So for me, I liked the idea of Harvard because it was far away and it was a good challenge. But I think had I gone to any other school, I think I would have been just as excited, other than I, at the time, wanted to go away.
Right, definitely. Thank you for answering that. And then last question here before we get started with our Q&A would be, what advice do you have for students trying to explore the law field or the legal field?
Well, I think the best thing you can do is lean in. You got to try stuff. That means doing things that feel awkward to you. They won't be awkward after you've done them a few times. So it's a great idea to, for example, ask professors what they think about law school, and they can tell you their experience or people they know. If you can talk to someone who's gone to law school, they can fill in some of the blanks for you. There are books and stuff that you can read about law school if you want to. I used to go to the University of Minnesota and study. I just loved the atmosphere because it's a beautiful school with a beautiful academic atmosphere. So I like that. But I just think the more you can talk to lawyers and ask them their perspective, talk to professors, basically lean into the conversation, as opposed to say, well, I'll do that my junior year, I'll do that my senior year, I'll do that after I graduate. I just lean into those awkward conversations and have as many as you can, where you just ask people, what do you do? I will say some lawyers have strong opinions, and I would be wary of any lawyer who says something like, well, the one thing I wouldn't do is this. Don't be this type of lawyer, be this type of lawyer, because that's that person's perspective. But I would say, high level, if you're exploring law, lean in. The other thing I did, it was once we decided to go away to law school, is we got in a station wagon, a group of college students, and we slept in the station wagon and went on a law school tour. We just showed up, just walked up and walked around campuses. We drove around the United States and just saw a bunch of law schools. That was really helpful, just to see other law schools. That was motivating, but also you kind of get a sense of, I just don't think I want to be here for whatever reason. So I think getting on the ground and going to see law schools is good. The other thing I would say, which is a little bit overwhelming, is if you get at all serious, go to the application for the law school you're thinking about and read it. It's probably, these days, it's probably a universal application, but you should just understand, oh, okay, so this is what's involved. Like, these are all the things that, and if you did that as a freshman or a sophomore, and then you start working towards that as a junior and senior, that'd be wonderful. So kind of depending on where you are in your academic career, the sooner you just say, okay, whatever, I'm going to look at the application and start seeing how I want to fill that out in a few years. That's a great idea.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that insight. I'm interested in the legal field as well, so that was really good to hear. So thank you for answering those questions. And now we'll transition to the Q&A portion of the meeting.
Great. Thank you both, Emma and David, for this. So we have a variety of questions that are in the Q&A, but definitely participants feel free to submit more. I'd love to get more of your questions. So a handful of these questions actually revolve around the application process. So one question was a little bit more logistical, but can you explain what you meant by the waiving process when it comes to the bar?
Yes, if you are already a member of one state bar, so you've actually studied for the exam and taken it, and it's a 2 or 3 day exam. So it's a lot of questions, it's a lot of essay writing, there's a multiple choice on a bunch of different subjects. So let's say you pass the Minnesota bar or the Arizona bar or the California bar. There's a number of other states that will say, well, if you've passed that state's bar, come on in and practice. You just need to fill out some paperwork. So for example, right now I'm filling out paperwork to be a member of the Arizona bar, and I won't have to take a new test because the Arizona bar respects the Minnesota bar and says, listen, if you've passed the Minnesota bar, it's good enough for us. So when I say waiving in, I mean you've already passed the test for one state, and there are some states that allow you to waive in. Washington, D.C. is another one of them. Other states like New York or California, you have to take their bar. It's a little more difficult. So that's why some people start out their career and they just take the most difficult bar. So they'll take the California bar because they think, well, it's a little bit easier to waive into other states if I start with a really difficult one.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like you were working a lot selling jewelry. You're very busy with that. And then you were also applying to law school at the same time. Can you talk more about your experience both working and applying, and what it took to do both of those at the same time?
Yeah, well, what I did when I applied to law school is, first of all, I took the LSAT very seriously. So I bought the LSAT books and I studied them very seriously. I took a lot of practice exams. I didn't do any fancy paid course because I had no money, but I did study hard and got my LSAT score. So one thing you need to do is find enough time to study for the LSAT. And so I found enough time to study for the LSAT. So what I would do is whenever I had free time, I would study for the LSAT, and I gave myself enough time to study. So I but I made sure I picked an LSAT date where I wasn't going to have an excuse. I didn't want to say, well, I wasn't able to study. And sometimes people take it again, which is fine, but I only took it once. So I gave myself a lot of time to study for the LSAT. And then the application process, I had to write an essay. So I had to do a bunch of practice essays and, get that done. And then I had to fill out all the long applications. And then I had to ask for letters of recommendation. So that was just finding professors who I had relationships with and asking the right letters and making sure they got them done, which is a little bit stressful. And then filling out the application is not that big a deal, but writing the essay can take some time. So the actual, I would say, application process itself is not that overwhelming. Probably what's more overwhelming is in the years before that, who are the professors or others who you went to their office hours and formed relationships with? Because if you haven't formed any relationships with anyone, then you're kind of scrambling when you're getting letters of recommendation. So for me, I would say during college, building relationships with professors was more time consuming than asking them for letters of recommendation, because you're just asking them. But there are some professors who will agree to do it and then not do it. So that's a problem because they're busy or something. So you have to stay on top of them. So what I was doing in my year off it wasn't that time consuming. I just had to stay on top of things. And whenever I had a break at work at the mall, I would walk over to a little pizza place and I would sit there and spend an hour working on my stuff, my law school stuff. And then I would do that on the bus, and then I'd do that on weekends. So I would say I wasn't playing a lot of volleyball or going bike riding a lot during that year. It was pretty focused, but you kind of have to have that as a priority.
And then one more question related to the application. I know a lot of students get stressed out about choosing the right school, right? So when you were applying or when you apply to jobs or firms, does the law school that you attend matter?
No, not as much as people think. I think the reality is, and this is the reality of the legal world, if you're, let's just say you're not going to go start on your own, but you want other places to hire you. So if you're going to start on your own, you're just starting on your own. You just go start on your own. You're going to be fine. You have a lot of options. I don't know what a single school any of my doctors ever went to. And, you know, if you start on your own, you're just building relationships and helping people. And if you're good, you're going to be fine. So I don't think the law school matters if you're going to start on your own. But if you want other people to hire you, which most people do, you know, you want the government to hire you or a law firm to hire you. The reality is what matters most is how well you do in law school, not what law school you go to. So if you go to a good law school, but you just don't do well at all in your classes, you're going to have a problem. If you go to a law school that's not as highly ranked, but you do extremely well, you're going to be fine. You're going to get good jobs. So that's why I go back to that foundation of college, the engagement. It's not just sort of putting stuff on a transcript to help you get in. It's actually building skills you will be using in law school, because maybe everyone knows this, but I want to make sure people hear this, because every lawyer will tell you this. The first year of law school determines the rest of your life. So it's a 3-year journey. The second and third years are not that big a deal. It's the first year, because people look at your grades for the first year, and that's what determines your job for the summer after your second year. So they will interview you after your first year in the fall. And if you've done poorly, then it's going to be really difficult. So you're kind of starting off then behind and you're scrambling. If you do really well, you get a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors open. And I don't mean really well, like top 10% of your class. I mean, you're just doing well, you know, you're getting reasonably good grades. So that's why I really recommend strongly people take that time off, because you want to be in a headspace where when you start law school, you are saying, you know, I'm mature, I can handle stress, and I'm ready to go full speed. So if you've taken 1 or 2 years off to either work, you know, you could be working as a hostess, you could be working as a writer, you could be working, you know, at a law firm, it doesn't matter. But you've just had a chance to pause and get a little more mature, because that first year you're going to be studying really hard and trying to get really good grades.
We have a couple more questions. It seems like talking about the application process is bringing in more and more questions.
Sure.
So it's good. So someone asks, for somebody starting off with 0 legal experience, where would you recommend starting in the legal field concerning jobs, internships? Essentially, how do you break into the field as an undergrad?
The really good news, if you remember when I showed you that picture with all the fruit, the really good news is law schools take care of law students. That's what's wonderful. Unlike other parts of the world, other things you can do in life, in law school, they really take care of you. So if you go to law school and on day 1, you have absolutely no idea what you want to do. Well, what field of law do you want to go into? Criminal, civil, business, intellectual property, environmental, something else? No one cares, and it doesn't matter. So in your first year of law school, you take basic courses. You take a course in contracts. Everyone takes it. You take a course in something called torts, T-O-R-T-S, torts. That just means accidents, like people hurting each other or having a problem. Everyone takes that. You take a course in property. What are the laws? Am I allowed to walk on my neighbor's lawn? What happens if I break down their fence? You know, just property. Everyone takes property law. And you take criminal law, so you learn about criminal, and you take something called civil procedure, which is just the rules of court, like how do you start a lawsuit. Everyone in the first year of law school, they all take the same basic classes. You might have one little fun elective that you take, but that really doesn't matter. So the good news is, if you're not sure what area of practice you want, I wouldn't worry about that at all, at all. I would just go to law school and try to do really well. And then what's going to happen is during the year, there's going to be speakers coming in, you're going to be learning from professors, you're going to be reading things, and you're going to start saying, oh, I think I might try this type of law. versus that type of law. And so that kind of what happens. And I would say the most basic demarcation for law students, and it happens in your first year of law, is you're leaning towards, I think I want to do something relating to litigation, any kind of litigation, divorce, intellectual property, business, criminal, government, poor people, helping poor people who get in fights with landlords, whatever it is, okay, litigation or non-litigation, which is advising people, helping people on transactions, guiding people through processes, working on regulations, working on, labor negotiations, whatever that is. That is, I would say, the biggest split. And what happens is after the first or second year of law school, law students start saying things like, I think I'm interested in some type of litigation. And other law students are saying, I think I'm interested in some sort of non-litigation. So that's kind of the big one. And my biggest advice to everyone is please don't worry about that. Just engage, have fun, have a great attitude, and then go into your first year of law school, just try to do really well, and then just have an open mind. Because as an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, figuring out whether you want to be an environmental lawyer, in my view, is ludicrous. Who cares? Just keep an open mind and see what happens. You'll figure out what vegetable or fruit you're going to follow during law school.
Great. And then do you happen to remember how many law schools you applied to? Do you have a recommendation for students for how many they should apply to?
Yeah, I think if you were going through the law school process, and my youngest daughter just went through the law school process, so I have contemporaneous information. She's a third year law student right now. So I went through the whole process and watched her do that within the last 3 years. So I guess a few big things of advice. Number one, try to figure out where you fit. That is easy to do. So once you have your LSAT score, and once you know your GPA, you can already start to see where you fit. So if your GPA is this and your LSAT score is this, you can go online and see where you fit. You can say, oh, I see. So this type of law school I'll get in easily. This type of law school is a stretch. This type of law school is impossible. And this type of law school, I may go there because it's really exciting, but it's so easy, it's a joke. So once you know your LSAT score and your GPA, you can literally go online and figure out what your chances are. Like, oh, I've got a 5% chance here, 50 here, 90% there. So step one is you can assess at a high level where you're going to land. Is that so good so far? Everyone makes sense so far? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's step one. I believe, now this is me talking, the mistake 90% of American students make, 90%, is they say, it's simple. I'm going to go to the highest ranked law school I get into. So I'm just going to, apply to these law schools. Oh my gosh, I got into this law school. That was a stretch. I only had a 9% chance of going. So why are you going there? Because it was a stretch. Have you visited it? No. Is it a state you want to be in? No. Do you think you'll enjoy the experience? No. Why are you going? You don't understand. It was a stretch. It was hard to get in law school, and I got in. It's like, that is not why you should go to law school. But 90% of American students, and I'm making up that statistic, but it's something like that, they just pick and that is, in my view, that is not what you should do. What you should try to do is think about where you're excited, where there's a cool fit, and you want it to be a good law school, but you want to have some fit. So for example, let's say you said, I love Minnesota, and I really want to practice law in Minnesota. Well, Minnesota has great law schools. Apply to the Minnesota law schools, and then visit them and think about which one is the best fit for you. Or you might say, I love the Midwest, but I'm not sure. I see there's some, okay, good, apply to Wisconsin, apply to Minnesota, apply to some Midwestern law schools. You might say, I really want to experience the West Coast. Well, there's 1 million law schools on the West Coast. You might say, I want a law school that's really good in intellectual property because I've decided already, because of my college, that's what I want to do. Well, fine, there's law schools that do that. But I would just say, backing up, figure out where you land, and then look for a good fit. In terms of the numbers, I don't agree with the apply to 400 law schools or 204. I think picking a handful of stretch law schools is a good idea. picking a handful of solid law schools is a good idea. And then having one or two good old fashioned, I know I'm going to get into this one is good. So I think if you're applying to 10 and under, you're good. I think it's extreme when you apply to 20, 30, 40, 50. I don't think you need to apply to 2. I think you can expand your options a little bit. But if you've already decided you want to go to University of Wisconsin and you think you're going to get in and you apply and you get in, then you're good to go. You don't need to apply to other law schools. And I think I applied to 8.
Good. Well, thank you for that. So circling back a little bit to some of the things you talked about in your presentation, you mentioned that part of being a lawyer is that you speak for others. Could you talk a little bit more about how you speak for others who don't share the same identities as you, such as gender, race, sexuality? Do you take that into account, or how do you take that into account when you do your work?
Yeah, in fact, I got some slides I'll show you that really like opened up my world. Let me see if I can, did I do this right? Am I sharing my slides? Can you see them? Okay, great. So I start my journey. Remember, I'm a kid from St. Paul who has had this very insulated life. And then I go to law school and I start practicing DC and I start expanding. Along the way, let me just show you some of the things I ended up doing. I went to Australia for 6 weeks and took depositions and met these people from Australia who were completely different, with completely different worldview. Many had never visited America. And that really required me to expand my view of people and that brain, that empathy part of the brain, understand where that was coming from. And then I had a chance to practice law by going to France and meeting with people from France who were French business people, completely different from the Americans who I had met, and working with them. And then I took depositions in Tokyo along the way and had to work with Japanese lawyers and spend a bunch of time with people from Japan. And that was a remarkable experience because their worldview was extremely different. And then this is Singapore. I spent weeks in Singapore investigating a case where I had to meet people from Singapore, which of course, many of you may know this, but the people who live in Singapore come from all over, and met with them. And then I spent a lot of time in London, which has people from all over the place. And I would say the most important thing is, as I started to meet people, whether it's from the world or in cases where the people are different from me, whether that's gender, ethnicity, or anything else, the most important mindset change I had to make was the learning mindset, which is why I have this classroom here, is much more not let me speak for you, but I need to listen to understand your perspective. And once I understand your perspective, I have a skill set that I think I can apply. But here's the problem. I can't use that part of my brain where I think about how you see something unless I really listen to you. So I would say one of the biggest lessons along the way was having to make sure I'm listening to get the perspective of others and then sharing that. And that was the biggest challenge. And it's been wonderful. But I mean, I would say, if you would have asked me when I was becoming a lawyer, oh, you're going to need to do a lot of listening from people from all these different perspectives, whether it's foreign perspectives or other perspectives, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. I want to be a trial lawyer. I'm going to trial and do trials. What are you talking? So I had to learn this along the way. And that was probably one of the deepest life lessons. It's one I have today. Every day I'm trying to understand other people's perspectives and hearing that. I have a couple quick examples. I just had a trial in LA for Samsung. It was a $240 million trial involving the Samsung S10 phone because a company in LA had claimed that their company's name was S10 and the Samsung's phone name was S10, and they were fighting over it. And we won the trial, but number one, my client was literally from Korea. So I'm talking to Koreans the entire time during the trial. And every juror was from a different background and ethnicity. So we had, if you can imagine, almost every ethnicity one sees in America, almost everyone was there. And so I was communicating to a group of people who had different perspectives than I did. And my client was literally people who live in Korea and have a completely different perspective. And I had to figure out how to tell the client, what I was going to do and listen to the client so I can speak for them. But I also had to make sure that the way I was presenting the case was a way where all of these people in the jury would understand it. And it was fun is afterwards, I got a chance to interview the jurors and they were able to tell me what worked and what didn't work. And that was wonderful to like, listen, okay, that's good to know. And then we had another case where we were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and a very different community than other communities. It's got its own vibe. And we had to explain this incredibly difficult scientific concept called crystallography. And we did it with tennis balls. And I came into a courtroom and I just showed witnesses tennis balls the whole time. And we won this billion-dollar trial. And afterwards, the jurors were saying it was incredibly helpful that you were teaching the science to us as opposed to lecturing to us about the science. And so that was one where we had to make, adjustments. And then I had another case where we were representing an American company being sued by a German company, and the German company brought a Nobel Prize-winning physicist as their expert who I had to cross-examine. And so we had to figure out how do we convince a group of jurors in California, again, widely diverse jurors, all these different backgrounds, that the Nobel Prize-winning physicist is wrong, that he doesn't know what he's talking about. That was a real challenge. Fortunately, we were able to win that trial, so that was exciting. And we talked to the jurors afterwards. And I would say the secret to that, I have one more, which is we had a trade secret case for 7 years where someone had stolen a trade secret, and we couldn't crack the case until we got their phone records. When we got their phone records, we learned that they'd made secret phone calls and that they had stolen the trade secret phone calls. But what I wanted to say was in all of these cases and all of these victories, these cases went on for years and years and years. I think the fundamental skill was that turning on that part of the brain where you say, who cares what I know? I don't care what I know. I need to know what's your perspective. What do you know? What do you feel? How have you been treated? What are you thinking about? And if you get into that mindset, we say putting yourself in the mindset of the jury, then you can make some progress. So that's been the other thing we've done is, for example, with women, 20 years ago, I just started picking out young women and saying, go to this trial, go to that trial, get on this plane. And we just started throwing them at trials. Because if you just wait for them to volunteer or wait for them to fit on a case, it's not natural. So whenever I found any woman who wanted to be a trial lawyer, they kind of showed interest, we would just inundate them with trial opportunities. So now, many years later, like I have a trial coming up, and the person running the trial is a woman from the University of Wisconsin who has been on a dozen trials, and she was one who was on many trials 20 years ago. And I have a bunch of other women I try cases with, and it's all because 20, 30 years ago, I went to these young women and said, we're going to get your trial experience. So I would say, you can't just say, well, naturally, people from different perspectives, people with different walks of life, they're going to get all the experience they need. That's not the case. You do have to say things like, there's someone from a different perspective who wants trial experience, get them in the courtroom, get them the experience. And that's been really important. So I would say, if you're someone with whatever your background, ethnicity, gender, whatever that is, if you think there's something you want to do, for me, it's being a trial lawyer, but it could be anything, voice that to others. Because the one thing I will tell you in 2023 is there are teams of people who want to help you. There are so many people who want to help you. But if you don't speak, if you don't say, this is what I want, then they might not do it. But if you tell people, I want to work on these deals, I want to do this type of law, I want to do this type of litigation, they will give you that opportunity. But you do have to speak up, because it doesn't come naturally or randomly. So that's one big piece of advice.
Great. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Emma now briefly as we conclude this session. So thank you again, David.
Sure.
Yeah, so just some final words quick. We would just want to say thank you so much for your time today, David. I know we really appreciate it. And then if students have any more questions for David, they can contact him via his legal administrative assistant, Deborah. And I will now put her email in the chat for everyone. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today, David.
It was a joy. Good luck with the journey to you and everyone else.
Thank you.